back and get to where you can hear me.
Oh, absolutely.
Nice shirt.
I like it too.
Boy, you know, we've got a lot of birthdays in January, huh?
Yep. Yeah. It's cold month this week.
You know, April must be a real romantic time. What if I made this comment that all food is clean? You know, this statement brings out a lot because what we do when we come to the scriptures is we come with our mindset. One of the things that's in our mindset is everything you shove in your mouth is food. That's not true, is it?
High fructose corn syrup is not.
Some things are vacuum cleaner bags. I remember when I was a little kid, I ate dirt. I ate dog food.
Milk bone.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Yeah. Teresita still has to hide the milk bones. But it's because we take our current understanding and we apply it to the scriptures. And you know what? Gets us in trouble. There's a guy, his name is Monty Judah, and he's from Oklahoma. And one of the things that he does that he's very good at, and I think it's his message. We used to succumb together. But he teaches on the Hebrew mindset. How many know that's way different than the Western European mindset? I got into a midrash one day, and it started to get out of control because the women in our congregation started bashing this guy who wasn't even part of the congregation. So number one, that was wrong. He wasn't there for them to talk to. So they just took the information that they had and they applied their Western European mindset. And here was the situation. He had multiple wives. If we're talking just about the scripture, how many know that's not wrong? There's rules that you got to go by. You got to keep them all at the same economic level. You got to give them all the same amount of attention. You got to, I couldn't do it.
No, you couldn't.
I barely keep up with one. So it's important to know the audience of the scriptures. And I put up here, I don't know if it's up there still. If you know, you know. And if you know, maybe this will be a good review for you. Because actually, when I put on the board, all food is clean, that's a true statement. Because Yahweh is the one who decides what's food for us and what's not. As a matter of fact, when I first started following Kasharut, there was a man, he wrote The Creator's Diet. I don't know, I think we have a copy of it.
Maker's Diet.
The what?
Maker's Diet.
The Maker's Diet.
It's Jordan Rubin.
And every time I turn on the radio, there would be an advertisement for this book. TV, infomercials for this book. Well, it didn't take me long to figure out that Father was trying to tell me something. And he made a comment, and this is what he said, and it stuck with me. He said, if you go out and buy a chainsaw or a weed eater or even a diesel pickup, it's important for you to check the manufacturer's suggested fuel for that motor. And I thought, well, that's right. He said, what happens if you put the wrong fuel in the motor? He said, let's just say gasoline in a diesel pickup. And it just happened 2 weeks before that, my wife filled the truck up for me with gasoline.
Not this one.
And it was a diesel pickup, and it made it about
quarter of a mile.
about 3 blocks. So his comments really meant something, and I was listening to it very intently. And he goes, how come if we do that for weed eaters, chainsaws, pickups, how come we don't consult the creator of the most amazing motor ever created, our bodies? Why don't we talk to the creator, the manufacturer, for his suggested fuel? I thought, hell, I don't know. I hadn't even thought about it. But I started thinking about it. So I didn't even know what all it was. I knew the pig thing, and I knew the catfish thing and the squirrel thing. But I started reading and studying what the suggested fuel is for our bodies. There is still a lot of confusion about that because we bring a Western mindset to the scriptures. When we see things like all food is clean, a lot of people who don't follow kashrut will use that statement, and it's kind of scriptural. We'll look at that as justification for not following the recommended fuel. And you don't have to. But what we get is cool things like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, high cholesterol. But we got to realize who Yahweh, speaking through Shaul, was talking to when we look at the scriptures. First one we're going to look at, well, before we do that, here's one thing that you need to understand. Scripture is for you, but it wasn't written to you. Think about that for a minute. Scripture is for us, and we need to study to show ourselves approved and all of that, but it was not written to us. Another way that we convolute the scriptures is in Genesis 1:1. I wish I had $1 every time I hear the statement that Yahweh created the heavens and the earth in 7 24-hour days. Where do we get that?
Western mindset.
In our Western mindset.
Because it says day,
Therefore,
therefore, it's gotta be a 24-hour day.
Right.
Can't be an eon or an era or
or a
the
god day.
days of glory, the whatever,
And I know you guys have heard that too, that, it was 7 24-hour periods, but actually, have we got that scripture up?
No, but
Let's just go to, the interlinear on that.
Genesis 1:1.
Huh? Yeah.
Genesis 1:1.
Well, let's go to the scripture and then go to the interlinear.
You gotta stretch your neck out now. Look at that thing.
I know, right?
No, that's why I was thinking, should we go back to this old board over here? I mean, this is way too high tech. But so
Okay.
easy when it works.
Let's come on down. Come on down. Whoop.
Whoop.
No, come on down. Okay. Verse 5. And Yahweh called the light day. In the darkness he called night. Let's look at 31:17. And read it for us.
Yom, from an unused root meaning to be hot, a day, whether literal, from sunrise to sunset, or from one set to the next, or figuratively, a space of time defined by an associated term, often used adverb.
Oh, you forgot the part of 24 hours.
Oh, yeah, I missed that part. Missed that one.
Who was this written to?
The Israelites by Moses, I believe, was it not?
Absolutely.
Oh, you went trivia today. You get a go.
It was written to Yahweh's people by Yahweh through the hand of Moshe. But we take our Western European mind, just like Travis said, and we put that 24-hour, that's what we know. We can't comprehend using something described by the context of the scripture.
Well, and Tom, on that note, I mean, we use the word day in that context as well. So I almost see it as we can absolutely understand the concept. We just refuse to do it because by God, the church said that's not what it meant. You know what I mean? But no, we can absolutely understand it because we say the day of Trump are coming, or the day of,
Back in the day.
back in the day, or whatever. I mean, we do it all the time. It's just
The church does this to us,
Yeah.
puts blinders on us.
so that we can't see that.
Absolutely. So it's important that we know who the scripture is being written to. Understanding the concept that scripture is for you but not written to you is key in Bible study.
That's where people have that excuse, like it wasn't written to us, so we don't have to follow it.
But it was written for us, not to us. How is it written for us?
Keeps us safe.
It's the roadmap,
Yeah, it's our instructions.
it's an instruction manual.
Well,
Construction.
and then something just hit me too. Maybe in a certain sense it even was kind of written to us, but from the mindset of you're either a sheep or a goat. So if you're a sheep, it really was written to you.
Right? That's
You know?
right.
Because, I mean, who are the sheep? They're the children of Yahweh. They're the lost 10 tribes that filtered throughout the nations. It was written to the sheep, so it really was kind of written to us, but it's the same concept that you're talking about, is you gotta understand that. You gotta understand that it was written to that Hebrew mindset. Because that's what we're called back to.
How many, here's a trivia question. How many books?
66.
56, she said.
66.
Well, 66. Your wife.
Paul said, how many, what we call books of the Bible, was written by Gentile people?
None yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
I've heard that question before.
No. A lot of people say, the Gospel of Luke, except he was a convert to Judaism and a disciple of Paul. No, he converted. So every bit of the scripture is written by a Hebrew to somebody else. That's important to know. There is not one book of the Bible that's written from a Western European mindset. Not one. Not one word. It was written by Hebrews.
Except maybe it's a translation.
Huh?
Except maybe it's added stuff that's in the translations. That
Yeah.
This is what this means.
But that's not really scripture.
Right.
Look at you guys.
Here's one people eisegete all the time. You want to get a drink and read that to us, narrator?
All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being.
What does that mean?
Well, I think to truly understand what that means, you have to understand, once again, the Hebrew mindset of lawful. The Western mindset of lawful, that means you can do anything you want to.
Right. But who was it written to?
Hebrews.
It was the Corinthians, was it not? The Corinthian converts.
Who still had a Gentile mindset. So you got a Hebrew guy writing to converts in Corinth that still has a large part probably of that mindset. And he's trying to instruct them. Today, you're exactly right, Travis. The sky's the limit. But being written by Hebrew means he's talking about his everything is everything inside the covenant. And he is used to people like that. How many have made the mistake of, since you know something, you assume everybody knows it?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Do that.
I know how to drive. I assume everybody else knows how to drive.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
had a problem with the dump truck this week at work. Electrical problem for the automatic tarp. So I went out to help the new guy, and while I was sending him in for the meter, I pulled the battery box off so I could check a fuse. And then I jumped up in the truck and we messed with it and got it to work, and I walked away. I assumed he knew I pulled that battery box off. Guess what happened? When he left for the dump, he ran the battery box over. I assumed he knew. He didn't.
He didn't know.
He didn't know.
He just did a boo-boo.
That's where I make a lot of my mistakes is I assume everybody has common sense. And then you go to Walmart.
Or watch people drive in the snow. Or,
Oh.
that's what I do.
Yeah. That's why I'm not allowed to go to Walmart anymore by myself.
Somebody's gonna die.
But it's the same issue here. People take their Western European mindset, and because they believe it to be that way, they think it's always been that way. No. It hadn't been that way. There's actually civilizations that don't think the way we do, that have been here for much longer than the United States has been.
Well, we're one of the youngest countries on the planet.
Right. But yet, we think everybody ought to do things the way America does things. That's just like if I go over to Richard's house to play with Richard, and Richard and the guys are playing football, but I got my baseball, a bat, and a glove, I want to play baseball. And I force Richard and the gang to stop playing what they're playing and play what I want to. That's exactly what we do to the scriptures. That's exactly what happened to the United Methodist denomination. But when Paul wrote this, a Hebrew, he's saying everything within the covenant is lawful. To him, that's everything. So he didn't even have to say within the covenant, because he assumed, just like we do, it's a human thing, that since he understood what he was talking about, everybody else would understand. When I was in undergraduate school, one of the hardest classes I ever took, and it was the most fun class I ever took, was creative writing. And the professor said, you can prove your point in writing, and it can be totally false, but because it's in writing, people will believe it. That was way before the internet. That was way before the computer, when we were still writing papers on a typewriter.
A composition notebook.
There was a life before the internet.
I saw part of it. The end part of life.
But the hardest thing that he ever had us do was write a set of instructions for something. And he had some topics on the board. And I picked what I thought would be easy And I wrote the instructions for tying your shoe.
Oh,
Nah.
why would you do that?
Because I thought it was easy.
Make a loop, you're cool.
Step one, you tie your shoe. Step two, you're done. But then he made me get up in front of the class, untie my shoe, and follow my directions to see if I could tie my shoe according to what I had wrote. Ooh,
It was rough, wasn't it?
yeah, I couldn't tie it. So I wore boots the rest of the semester to that class. But, yeah. Yes, you can convince people of falsehoods if it's written, if it's in the newspaper, if it's on the internet. But you have a responsibility if you're writing something to make sure your audience understands it. That's a Western European mindset. That's not a Hebrew mindset. Paul wrote it. It's your job to understand it. As a matter of fact, Peter wrote, Paul is very difficult to understand.
Second Peter 3:16.
Okay, let's read it.
As also in all the epistles, speaking in them of these things in which we are, in which some things hard to understand, which untaught and unstable people twist to their own destruction, as they do also the rest of the scriptures.
Absolutely, he's talking about eisegeting, but he didn't even have that word in his vocabulary. And if you did not understand that it was a Hebrew man writing to believers in Corinth, trying to give them instructions, you could misinterpret that scripture in 1 Corinthians very easily. But once you start filling in the background, we understand that he's trying to say something else. He also mentions this in another place in 1 Corinthians.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians 6:12-17. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Foods are for the stomach, and the stomach for foods, but God will destroy both it and them. Now the body is not for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God both raised up the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a harlot? Certainly not. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a harlot is one body with her? For the two, he says, shall become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him.
Okay, let's go back up. He's repeating himself. Actually, this is the first mention. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful.
What things would not be helpful if they're lawful?
Well, because it separates us from the group. Right? You've got to congregate with the rest of the white babies now. And Yeshua even said, don't think I've come for peace. Remember? I have not. And he separates. He says, you know, father and son, brother and brother, mother and daughter. There's a division there. And as we all know, in the process of trying to follow what Father says is the outline of the covenant, we have to walk in the wilderness for a while. And that's a good thing. But the world wouldn't see it that way. What other ways is it not helpful?
Well, let's just go back to the, what you're talking about, multiple wives thing. It'd be lawful for Paul to have multiple wives.
Mm-hmm.
Paul didn't have any wife, from my understanding, because while it's lawful to do that, it would have been a distraction from his work that the Father called him to.
That's why Father says the king can have how many wives?
One.
One. Because he is supposed to be married to the people. That's not helpful. Well, I would say it was helpful because you only have one wife. But, and he goes on in verse 13, food for the stomach and the stomach for food. Again, that's like all food is clean. Right? So what's he talking about in verse 13?
The foods that God said is food, is for the stomach.
Absolutely. He didn't change. The blood of the Messiah did not cancel that out. And those rules are still in effect today. Because heaven and earth are still intact, right? Yeshua said, Torah will not be done away with until heaven and earth are gone. They're still there. One of the problems that Paul had, and this is not the only occurrence, but one of the problems Paul had is in what he would consider pagan societies was sexual immorality. It was pretty rampant. So now he's got to teach them about that aspect of walking with Yahweh. You can't do the things you used to do. These things are the covenant. And he even tells them, I think it's in chapter 10, that you were no longer Gentiles. You've been enlightened, you've done this, you've done that, and you've learned. You can't go back to that old man. "2,000 years later, we put our wisdom to the scriptures and we get this convoluted understanding that keeps running in circles, and it looks like verses contradict each other, but they don't. If you go back to a Hebrew mindset and see it through those glasses, it makes perfect sense. So Paul did not do away with Torah, the instructions. He doesn't have that authority. Here's another thing about Paul, and this is a good example. How many know that Paul is in prison when he's writing this? First of all. Second of all, he's answering questions that these congregations have. You know what? We had these answered, but we don't know what the question was. Have you ever just listened to one side of the conversation when your wife or husband's on the phone with somebody? You can just hear that side of the conversation.
You can extrapolate certain things, but certain things you can't.
Yeah. And a lot of times I'm wrong.
No.
But that's what we have here. We have one side of the conversation. And that is not enough to form doctrine around, but yet that's exactly what our brothers in the institution of the church have done. They take one side of the conversation and make a doctrine or a theology about it. It's not good grounds. So please, before you start studying the scripture, most Bibles have in the front of the chapter, let me just flip over there. It tells you who the author is, the purpose of the scripture, another difference between Matthew and 1 Corinthians is the audience. Who was Matthew written to?
He was writing to, wasn't Pilate, but it was somebody similar to that, somebody in authority, I thought it was, in the Greek authority, so that they can understand.
He's writing to the Jews.
Okay.
And he's writing to support Torah. That's why as you go through and as you study through Matthew, there's a lot of references back to Torah.
I thought, what is the very first words of Matthew say? I thought it said right there who he was written to. It said, I write this to you so you'll have an understanding of blah, blah. Wish I could decide if I can't.
Don't worry, we can look it up.
No, the first thing is
Oh, the
the
genealogy.
genealogy, yeah.
I can't remember, I thought someplace in there. Yeah, I'll have to look a little bit.
That sounds like Paul. He often used that. So,
Okay.
know the audience, know who's writing it. Is there any questions, statements?
Yes, sir. Good word.
Okay.
All right. With the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Where the Spirit of